The first one that we hear again and again is very simply, I am overwhelmed. It's too much for me to handle. The caregiver is saying, I feel afraid and vulnerable inside. Number three, this is a very common question. Where do I draw the line? Number four, because they are the buffer between the person suffering and the rest of the family, they can see that the suffering is actually tearing my family apart and they don't know what to do about it. And finally, the fifth point, their concern is, what's the point of it all? If this is going to be a slippery slope, then why am I doing all this? For those of you who are caregivers, I want you to remember that fateful day when you got this unexpected promotion. I call it a promotion to become a caregiver, right? Just like illness comes as a shock, the role of caregiver also for many people comes as a shock. It's a sudden promotion, and unlike in the business world or unlike in professional organizations, perhaps it's like motherhood, right? There are no training courses, no senior to show you the way, let alone any recognition or reward. You're suddenly tossed into the deep end, and suddenly you realize that, oh, I've got to be a caregiver now. Now, obviously, there are primary caregivers. Often that is the closest relative. It could be a spouse, or it could be a sibling, or it could be a parent, or it could be a child. And the role of the primary caregiver is to address the personal needs, the physical needs, the emotional needs, the medical care. And as we know, most caregivers are not very well trained or not very well prepared at all to be able to do this. Plus, they are dealing with their own challenges. So it's a very difficult role to play. And I applaud and commend and admire caregivers who do this amazing work. But there could also be secondary caregivers who are typically younger. And so we have come across in our work, young children, maybe even late teens or early adults, 22, 23, 24, somebody's nephew or niece plays the role. And typically what they do is that they get information, they browse the websites, they see the videos, they talk to people, they engage with the doctors, they engage with the relatives. In fact, tomorrow I have a call with somebody who is the daughter of a good friend of mine who actually passed away from cancer. And she was the person, she's only 24 years old, and she was the person who was basically doing the external contact. And obviously, she took a lot of that burden on herself. And the third is, which I haven't covered here, is that you also have the professional caregivers. So whether it is the medical fraternity or the nursing fraternity or the counselors or the therapists or even the attendants at home, these are also professional caregivers. So there is a whole ecosystem of caregivers, but in our work, we tend to primarily work with the primary caregiver and occasionally with the secondary caregiver. Now, again, in our work, we have come across many common themes and patterns with caregivers. So I'm just going to quickly list them. What are they? The first one that we hear again and again is very simply, I am overwhelmed. It's too much for me to handle. And I'll explain each one of them very briefly. The second is that the caregiver is saying, I feel afraid and vulnerable inside. Number three, this is a very common question. Where do I draw the line? I'll explain each one of these. Number four, because they are the buffer between the person suffering and the rest of the family, they can see that the suffering is actually tearing my family apart and they don't know what to do about it. And finally, the fifth point, their concern is, what's the point of it all? If this is going to be a slippery slope, then why am I doing all this? So let me explain each one of them. I'm overwhelmed. This is a very common thing that we hear. Obviously, the caregiver also is facing a lot of stress and is struggling with depleted energy. So there is physical fatigue and emotional drain on the caregiver. So we like to say, and Nilima has a wonderful video, and you can go to our YouTube channel and have a look at it. It's called Tips for Caregivers, where she says it's important for the caregiver to wear your oxygen mask first. Just like when you go to a flight, they will tell you that, if the oxygen level drops, the mask will fall, and you please put on your mask first before helping somebody else. So in the same way, we like to say to caregivers that, are you wearing your oxygen mask? And do you know what is it that energizes you? And are you giving it enough time and attention and space so that you are tanking up on your energy before you can support somebody else? And therefore, we say it's very important for caregivers to diagnose and manage your own stressors. Physical stressors, emotional stressors, mental stressors, relationship stressors, and spiritual stressors. And that's why we have created this online diagnostic. I will soon share with you the link. You can actually go there and take it, and you can use it to diagnose your own stress level. The second is that, there is fear and vulnerability inside for the caregiver. There is fear on behalf of the loved one, and there is also their own fear of how they will cope and manage. This is entirely natural. Facing a loved one's deterioration in front of your own eyes is the hardest thing for a human being to bear. And the other thing is that you have your own anguish, but it's quite possible that your loved one's anguish will also transfer onto you, because you're in such close psychological and energetic and physical proximity to that person. So just like we say to people who have cancer, that please seek help. Don't try to do it on your own. We say the same things to caregivers. Please seek help. It takes a lot more courage to share than to hide. Please do not just try to be the strong person. Please do not try to swallow your fear and vulnerability. Please be open about expressing it, because you will get the help that you need if you seek it. So we ask them to find confidants, relatives, friends, support groups, like all the wonderful things that Bhavna has mentioned that Caregiver Sathi does. We encourage them to attend workshops, learn new techniques and approaches, to access your inner resources. So we recommend that you do things like yoga, pranayama, meditation, prayer, etc. And what we have seen is that when people actually are willing to share their fear and their vulnerability, when people are willing to be authentic and they seek help, the universe will support you. It's amazing the kind of resources, and I can speak from my personal experience, and Nilima will speak from her personal experience, how the universe will come forward to support you with resources and with love and care, and all kinds of amazing things start to happen. The third concern, as I mentioned, is where to draw the line. And this is a tricky one, because as a caregiver, you have to find that sweet spot between overprotecting and underprotecting my loved one. So there is a deep love between you and the person you're caring for. And how do you find this sweet spot? How do you find that perfect balance between what the patient needs, what the family needs, and what do I need, I as the caregiver? So we say, experiment, but be realistic. Each family's needs and resources are different. Now, if Nilima were here speaking, she would talk about her own challenge that she faced when she was looking after me. When I decided that I'm going to change my diet quite significantly, and therefore, she, as the person who was both my caregiver, the mother to our children, and the person handling the kitchen, she had to completely reorient the kitchen. And you can imagine the kitchen is a very critical part of every home. And to reorient the kitchen was a really massive challenge for her. And so she says that, it took her a long time to figure out what is that sweet spot, where to draw the line. And we also say to caregivers that, look, because caregiving and because there is so much love going on in the family, it is really important to assess openly and honestly what everyone is feeling. And therefore, if all voices are heard, all will be ready to compromise. Now, this is something we have seen in many families where, in trying to protect each other, they do not have the tough conversations. They do not have the honest conversations. And that makes it harder than ever. So, we recommend to people that it's important to have those open conversations about what each one feels and what each one needs. Of course, there is no perfect formula for this, and which is why we say you may have to experiment and that it takes time. The fourth concern is that suffering is tearing my family apart. What do I do? And so, we give people a warning that unfortunately the typical parent and carer relationship honors neither and hinders both. And psychologically speaking, this is defined or described as codependence. Codependence means that the two parties, the patient and the carer, get so locked in to each other that actually they are not helping each other grow. They are actually parasiting each other's energy. And psychologically, it is important to identify this and to break this codependence so that there is healthy interdependence. Now, this is in a way a technical term. So I would say that if you're finding in your relationship there are lots of conflicts, there is a lot of passive aggression, there are a lot of frictions and so on, maybe it is a good idea for you to get expert help so that you can avoid this codependence and find a way to be interdependent. And finally, point number 5, what's the point of it all? Uh, this is a very difficult one. And again, Nilima says very powerfully in her video that unbearable pain sharpens your urgency so that you as a caregiver now have to focus on really what is important. You don't have the luxury or you don't have the time and you don't have the resources and you don't have the energy. So you really have to focus on what is important, and it really sharpens your focus to be able to do that. You have to look at life afresh, and you as the caregiver may have to take the fork in the road of really looking at how you are going to change and grow through this process. And this is something that again I can say that Nilima has done wonderfully herself. While caregiving is really tough, in our work with caregivers, when we have had them in coaching sessions, we ask them the question, what if you don't resist the pain? Instead, what if you ask, what lies beyond it? What meaning can I make from it? How will I use it to change and learn and grow? And suddenly that opens up lots of possibilities and lots of options. The answer, of course, is growth. So I just come back to where I started, which is just like cancer can be a platform of growth and evolution for the person facing cancer himself or herself. Cancer can also serve as a powerful platform for growth and evolution of the caregiver. As I said, we have created this free online diagnostic questionnaire where you can diagnose your stressors and your strengths, whether you are somebody who's facing an illness, whether you're a caregiver, whether you're a family member, or whether you just out of curiosity want to figure out what are your stressors and strengths. You're welcome to go and take this questionnaire. And as I said, we have a lot of resources on our website, on our YouTube channel. I particularly recommend, in our book, we have written a whole chapter on caregiving, which is not something that is written about very often. And Nilima has created a really nice, powerful video, some of the points which I've covered here, which also you can go and have a look.